welcome to the fifth in our series of video podcasts that we're calling Stories with Tony and Linda. These give an overview of the Bethany 7 Stories Bible Study course. We're hoping this will get you excited about digging deeper into that. Today we're going to talk about the fourth of the 7 stories, which is called From Wrath to Compassion. And this explores the themes of compassion in the book of Isaiah, specifically 2nd Isaiah. We look at the servant, which is a figure that Isaiah introduces. We look at the compassionate language and how Isaiah uses language to underscore the compassionate nature of God. And finally, in the third lesson, we look at how Jesus takes a metaphor or a symbol from the Old Testament called the cup of wrath and transforms it into something radically new in the Gospels. So as before, Tony, can we ask you to give us an introduction to the cycle as a whole?
Right, yes, because as always in these cycles, the 7 stories, we go from one thing to another. It shows a move forward and a shift. This time we go from wrath or anger or violence to compassion. So it's explicitly a shift from violence to non-violence. And we see this happening in the condition of the exile or the aftermath of the exile, which we saw before in our previous story. Resulted in the Deuteronomic worldview, which understood the exile as a punishment. Now we understand it as something very different. We see the outcome of the exile as an event of compassion and nonviolence. So it's hugely important, and we'll discuss the prophet Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah, and also the way this, as Linda has said, the way this is taken up by Jesus in the New Testament.
And that differs from, because forgiveness, the forgiving nature of God came out in the book of Genesis, but this is much more explicitly underlined as God's compassion.
Yes, I mean, in Genesis, you kind of get the questioning about the violence of the Bible and the violence of God, and ultimately a very strong suggestion that God is not violent, and is exemplified in the forgiveness of Joseph. However, it goes much deeper in this prophet known as 2nd Isaiah, beginning at chapter 40 of the book of Isaiah, because this figure of the suffering servant is introduced.
And can you tell us a little bit more about that figure?
Right. In the course of the chapters from 40 onwards in 2nd Isaiah, we get these passages which refer to or speak in the voice of a servant. And this figure of a servant is new in Israel because it's not a king and it's not a prophet. It actually goes along with the loss of power and the loss of the prophetic tradition that's associated with the king that occurred through the exile. And now, with this marvelous reading and the poetry of 2nd Isaiah, the figure of the servant emerges as someone who suffers, and in this suffering does the will of God. So this is so mysterious. So this is not just the questioning of God's violence and the introduction of the possibility of human forgiveness and nonviolence, but this is someone who actually endures violence and is explicitly nonviolent, and in that process does the will of God. So through this, the meaning and the nature of God is changed. Through the figure of this servant, the meaning of God has changed. And then when Jesus picks it up, basically 500 years later in the New Testament period, he makes that shift absolutely conclusive, so that God now is the same as the servant, the same as one who does not retaliate, and therefore communicates divine forgiveness and compassion in a complete and absolute way. So what's happening in Second Isaiah is so important for the overall development of the scripture and for the final shift that comes about in Jesus.
So would you perhaps read what from one of the songs of the servant?
Right. So reading through from these songs, we get something of the nonviolent character
The Bible
of
third.
of the oh, okay, right, we're looking at of the suffering servant. So the first one comes at chapter 42, and I just read it because it's beautiful and it's explicit. Beginning chapter 42, verses 1 through 4. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul, this is God speaking, delights. I have put my spirit upon him, my spirit. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be crushed until he has established justice in the earth and the coastlands wait for his teaching. So we have a figure here who does not retaliate, and he does not use violence against the weak, and rather, on the contrary, he will not apply violence to anything that's broken, and really that's the condition of Israel. And then if we go to chapter 50, verses 4 to 9, we hear this. So this is actually what is known as the third song. So there's 4 songs altogether, and this is the third. The Lord has given me the tongue of a teacher, that I may know how to sustain the weary with a word. Morning by morning he wakens my ear to listen as those who are taught. The Lord God has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious. I did not turn backward. I gave my back to those who struck at me, and my cheeks to those who pulled out the beard. I did not hide my face from insult and spitting. Therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like flint, and I know that I shall not be put to shame. He who vindicates me is near. So here it's even more explicit that the servant endures violence but does not retaliate, and that he is taught to do so. Every morning he awakens as a disciple who listens to the Lord. So he's learning his character, his nature of non-retaliation from God, directly from God, and then he becomes a teacher in turn to human beings.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the 4th song of the servant and how that's been more controversial in the Christian tradition?
Right. So when you get to the 4th song, running through chapters 52 and 53 of Isaiah, you get to something that's more difficult, because it seems like, on a surface reading, that it is God who's doing this violence to the servant. It is God's will that he be brought low, that he be crushed, in one of the translations. So this has been ready meat or fodder, shall we say, for a theory of penal substitution, that is God's wrath that is inflicted upon the servant. But that is a very superficial and non-consistent reading, that the servant is learning directly from the Spirit of God. And really, what the servant is doing in that 4th song is enduring violence in order to make many righteous through his non-violence. That's the shift that God intends. Mm-hmm. And he will prosper. He shall see the light and bring many to God. So through the interpretation that we're giving, and consistent with the whole the successive songs of the servant, we can see that this what God is doing is allowing and permitting and even willing the violence done to the servant, but for the sake of a revelation of the true character of God, to bring this fundamental, this radical change to the human experience.
And it really took 5 centuries until Jesus, before the interpretation of these songs uh, was I don't know how to say it, became
Was fulfilled,
evidence. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
I mean,
Before that, they were kind of overlooked. They were hard to understand.
And they were even overturned in bowdlerized versions, like but kind of highly prejudicial translations that actually changed the meaning.
Right.
So it was when Jesus came along that he fully embraced the pathway of the servant.
And how do you see the association of Jesus with the servant in the Gospels and the New Testament? Can you give us
Well,
some
in many
examples?
places, the servant is referenced in many places in the New Testament, both by Paul and then in the gospel itself. So one of the places is in Romans chapter 8 verse 32, talking about God. He who did not withhold his own son, but gave him up for us all. That giving up uh, references or echoes chapter 53 verse 12, which tells us that the son poured himself out to death, gave himself up. This is a continual expression in New Testament, the kind of pouring out of Jesus, which comes out of the at the end of that fourth song. So if God does in Paul, God does the same. He does not withhold his son. He pours his son out in order that the Son will in turn give us life. There's a continuity between, in Paul's version here, Paul's vision in chapter 8, there's continuity between the action of Jesus and the action of God.
And then in Mark's Gospel.
Yeah, so the songs of the servant are actually quoted or one of them is quoted by Matthew. That first one, he will not cry out. And other places. But one of the clearest references in the Gospels is in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, where Jesus says, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. He is the servant, and to give his life as a ransom for many. People have concentrated on the ransom bit and seeing it as transactional, that to whom did he give his life? To whom was the ransom paid? What was the price? Oh, there's a price, there's a transaction, and then we get our life back, really in terms of the gift of immortality or the promise of immortality. So that's the deal done really at this kind of heavenly level. But in actual fact, Jesus is saying, the important thing is the giving of his life and the service. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And it's that is the ransom, that it's that introduction into the human experience of this incredibly powerful figure of self-giving service to others that then sets us free, ransoms us individually, anthropologically, from violence to forgiveness and compassion.
Okay. So in the second lesson, we focused more about how second Isaiah uses language as a whole to show God's personal care and compassion for his people. He does this in 3 ways. We've already seen explored one of those, that he sort of exemplifies compassion in this figure of the servant.
Mm-hmm.
What are the other 2 ways that
Isaiah? Second Isaiah, the prophecy explicitly invokes compassion as the meaning as its meaning. It says in chapter 54, verses 7 to 8. This is a beautiful statement. It could almost like be the essence of the prophecy. For a brief moment, okay, this is a very small period, I abandoned you, but with great compassion, I will gather you. In overflowing wrath, and the images of like water slopping out of a bucket, it's like something almost unintentional. For a moment, I hid my face from you, but with everlasting love, I will have compassion on you, says the Lord your Redeemer. So the prophet says that any experience of wrath, I mean, he doesn't kind of leave it behind completely, but he says that any experience of wrath that you may have endured, therefore the Deuteronomic viewpoint, was only temporary, and it was a kind of almost a mistake. Now, my compassion is going to go on forever. There's now a radical change in the character of this divine human relationship that is now from henceforth going to be characterized by compassion.
So the content of the book of Second Isaiah is the themes are of compassion. The actual narrative is teaching of the compassionate nature of God.
It is.
So what is the final way that Isaiah uses language?
Well, Second Isaiah is like them all, but perhaps supremely a poet, someone who uses language very effectively and suggestively to actually, the language also brings about by its own power the message and the communication that the poet intends. So the language kind of lifts us up to that level. And one key feature of Second Isaiah's language, and it's difficult to explain without looking at the text in detail, so we can't really do that. But in summary, it uses the personal pronoun in at multiple points and in multiple ways, because it says something like, I, me, myself, say to you, I have not abandoned you, I love you, I will look after you. So that repeated, that kind of triple pronoun.
But me, myself, and I am with you.
I am with you.
And I am with you.
That's right. It is the form of personal presence and solidarity. I am with you, as Linda says. That is communicated by this poetry.
And of course, in the Bibles, the translations, they just condense it down to
I am he.
I am he.
Yeah, I mean they make it a verbal for I am he, or I am. So it becomes kind of mysterious. But in the original Hebrew poetry, it comes across more powerfully as I, you know, like the I thou kind of relationship, which has been picked up in scholarship. That this is about a personal relationship. So if you think about it, what is more characteristic, or what could be more characteristic of a communication or a relationship of nonviolence um, than personal relationship, and what could be more characteristic of personal relationship than nonviolence? So, but if and he also uses the figure of the mother. If a mother can abandon her children, I will never abandon you. That's from Second Isaiah 2. So it's that absolute trust of relationship that the language is encouraging. I am with you. I am who I am he who is with you. That is what is breaking through here. This depth of relationship,
very intimate,
totally first person, totally reliable. That your mother is never going to forsake you.
Yeah.
Well, even if a mother can do it, and might do it, I won't. Right. So this is the inbreaking of the profound character of relationship that's already there in the Deuteronomic reading, but it's not fleshed out, literally fleshed out as it is here with the suffering servant and the mother figure, etc. And as I say, essential to this infinite trust of relationship is non-violence.
So Isaiah, by using these different semiotic approaches, becomes kind of like a laboratory for dealing with the violence and the loss experienced through the exile. And in doing so produces this wonderfully new insight into the nature of God. How does Jesus then continue this semiotic shift in understanding our relationship with God?
So yes, so we get to the third lesson in the cycle, and we see how Jesus appropriates this material and carries it further. And as I just read there, Jesus calls himself a servant. He's the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. So he directly appropriates the term. But one of the key ways in which Seven Stories sees this change is at the end of his life, and some of the language and symbolism that he uses at the end of his life. And the core figure or metaphor that we focus on is the cup
of wrath,
which in the Old Testament is to be understood as the cup of wrath.
Can you tell us more about what that the Old Testament metaphor of the cup of wrath was, where it came from, and where we find it?
Right. So in the agony in the garden, Jesus says, "Let this cup pass from me, but not my will, thy will be done." So we're saying that Jesus is directly invoking the cup of wrath from the Old Testament. Now, this has been read as God's personal wrath, but actually it's much more rooted in the actual phenomenon of human violence. And going back, as Linda's asking, going back to the Old Testament, to the prophet Habakkuk, we see how the violence of Assyria is condemned for what it's doing to the nations. And then the prophet, because that's 8 centuries basically before Christ, and they haven't been able to find their way fully through Isaiah, second Isaiah, to the true solution. The prophet says, well, God's response to your violence is to make sure that this cup of violence or wrath that you pour out on others will be returned to you. So what goes around comes around, and that is true. I mean, obviously, people who inflict violence on others, they will invite it on themselves, basically by human imitation, by mimesis, as we know from British Gerard.
So this cup of wrath is like when an army invades or a nation invades, it's like getting drunk on the violence. So you stagger, you fall,
the world spins around.
Right. So
you lose your bearings completely.
It's humiliating. You're
undressed.
All those images of being drunk with this cup of staggering or cup of wrath.
This is Linda's quoting from the prophet Habakkuk and from later prophets who play out the metaphor that, and really it does describe the experience of invading violence. Like your world is shattered. There's no place to stand. You're falling over. And then the prophet says, well, you're making others drunk. You're going to get drunk too.
So you get this image of this cup of wrath that's passed from one nation to another.
Right.
And initially the original cup was God gives this cup of wrath, staggering, he passes it from one nation to another. But at some point, especially with this Deuteronomic worldview and the experience of the exile, the Israelites start to see that God has then passed that cup of wrath to them, and they have had to drink it.
Yeah. So kind of almost paradoxically, in second Isaiah, that is stated explicitly.
In chapter 51.
chapter 51. Yeah, if we could find this.
Right.
Yes. It says in chapter 51, second Isaiah says the following: rouse yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk at the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, who have drunk to the dregs the bowl of staggering. Therefore, hear this, who are wounded, who are drunk, but not with wine, with violence. Thus says your sovereign, the Lord your God, who pleased the cause of the people. See, I have taken from your hand the cup of staggering. You shall drink no more from the bowl of my wrath. I will put it into the hands of your tormentors. So even there in Second Isaiah, the idea is that, well, first of all, like we're saying, God hands out that cup, which was first given to the nations who inflict violence. Well, because you've done wrong, because there has been wrath in your experience, we have to say, yes, that cup was given to you, but now it's going to be taken away. It is going to be given to your tormentors.
But you still get that idea of this cup that is always going to be passed from one nation to another.
Right. Yeah.
So, but that's really not a fix of the
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
I mean, Isaiah does the best he can. He says, well, I'm going to take away this cup and give it to, give it to somebody else. You won't have to drink it again. But that cup is still there.
Cup is still there. And you can see how naturally the interpreters would say, well, Jesus is drinking that cup for the sake of our benefit vis-a-vis God, because God is the one who's handing it out. So God actually becomes the source of violence. Whereas what we're saying is that in the metaphor, really it's the nations, even just passing it on. If God takes the cup and passes it on to another nation, it's still human to human violence that's at play. And so it's a false interpretation to say that it's the violence coming from God. It's very evident it goes against the metaphor. So when we get to the New Testament to complete this image of Jesus taking the cup, we go to the Last Supper.
Because as we said before, it's only a temporary fix to pass the cup from one place to another. Jesus, the only way to fix the problem is to actually drink the cup completely.
To its dregs, and so there's no more left.
And that leaves us to
I mean, if the cup of so to make it clear now, Jesus, the night before he dies, as we all know, has a meal with his disciples, and at the end of the meal, he gives them the cup of blessing, and he says, "This is my blood poured out for you."
And that's in contrast to the cup that he's talking about in Gethsemane, and the cup, a bit of wine that he drinks on the cross before he dies and says it is finished. That is the cup of wrath.
Right.
But this new cup that he introduces in the Last Supper is something completely new that replaces
it's my life poured out for you. So it's a cup of compassion, it's a cup of forgiveness, it's a cup of love. And that's the way, of course, we take it. But if the cup of wrath is hiding below or beside this other cup, this cup of blessing, then you can't really take it seriously. It diminishes, it takes away its integrity. And that's been the way in which the Christian church has really experienced itself and experienced the Eucharist, that it's not really real, because there's this punitive cup that Jesus had to drink from God, and therefore you can't really trust the cup of blessing. But if you're saying, actually, in actual fact, Jesus has drunk up the cup of wrath and violence, and therefore is able to hand out another cup, a different cup, a cup of unlimited, unconditional nonviolence and forgiveness, then that makes sense, and it doesn't result in a dual character of God and a split personality, and the kind of unstable nature of the Christian gospel up to this point.
So really, if you hold on to the penal substitution atonement, you can so easily reinterpret the cup of blessing, the cup of the communion cup, in terms of punishment, in terms of sacrifice, and it's reintroducing that old human way of displacing human violence onto God back into the Eucharist, into the communion.
Into the context of the Eucharist, so it becomes confusing and sacrificial, as Linda's saying.
But in the Gospels, we very distinctly see the two cups, basically.
Yeah.
That Jesus drinks the cup of wrath.
Yeah.
He talks about it at Gethsemane. I do not want to
drink
this up, but I will if that's where you're leading me, Father. And then on the cross, he drinks the bitter wine and says, "It is finished."
In John's Gospel, yeah.
And then in at the Last Supper, he says, I'm going to replace that cup, the cup of human violence that we're so familiar with, and replace it with the cup of my blood, the blood of the new covenant, this new way, this new way of doing things.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's appalling to offer somebody to drink their blood. It's intolerable, and it goes entirely against the Jewish sacrificial practice. The blood is poured out, it's only for God. It's only if the blood has a completely transformative meaning, a transformed and transformative meaning, if it's only love and self-giving. It's only pouring out of myself to you, not for the sake.
And we take it in, and it becomes part of us.
Yes, right.
So it's not something that poured out as a sacrificial offering to God, to the divine, to the deity.
Yeah.
It's something that we absorb and take into our bodies, and it transforms us
It
from
makes
within.
It makes us new creatures. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So this is the semiotic shift that it's this entirely new relationship that's not founded in an anthropology of violence, but rather in the revelation. It's the revelation of a theology of compassion. So this whole cycle transforms the way we understand God. There's no wrath in God. There's no anger pointed to us. No punishment in God. Instead, God is revealed as a compassionate, loving mother, really. So this is a semiotic shift. This is a new breakthrough in our understanding of God that is revealed. From wrath to compassion, semiotic shift. And it's first revealed in 2nd Isaiah, but then embodied in the person of Jesus.
Right.
Isaiah prefigures it and prophesies it, but Jesus actually carries it through and lives it. And so this is a huge semiotic shift that we're still coming to grips with.
I mean, I could note here, that when you teach 7 stories, you go through the 7 stories guide. People who go through the study, tend to relate to different stories. They're particularly informative or transformative for different individuals, and that's the way it should be, because we all have different access points. And Linda, my wife, has always been very impacted by that, and she references it so much and talks about it a lot, by that shift of one cup to another. This is something that kind of remained with her, and her stress on it here reflects that. So and that's, as she's saying, that sums up the character of semiotic shift. You go from one cup to another. You don't have just one single cup and one God who inflicts it because finally it has to go somewhere. No, you actually have 2 cups. This is what she's saying, and has brought more and more to my attention that actually you have an old cup of wrath, an old cup of violence, and then a new cup, which is hard for us human beings to grasp,
because we're so used to having to pay for something. Someone has to pay a price. But God's grace is sheer giving.
Yeah,
it's a cup that's overflowing.
That is the character of grace, and grace doesn't really fit with penal atonement. They don't go together. So this understanding of atonement as the revelation of non-violence is a much more consistent theology of grace.
Thank you. So on that point, we will finish today's recording, and we'll hope to see you again for the next cycle. Thank you.